The Arctic fox. This is section 2 of our presentation on predators in Sweden. So we have now gone through the predators that we have kind of all over Sweden, but we didn't mention this little beastie, a personal favourite of mine, of course. Excuse me. The Arctic fox, fjällräv in Swedish. Now I know I didn't pronounce the Swedish names earlier, I'm not going to risk it, but this one I've had enough practice with. Fjällräv basically means mountain fox, fjäll, mountain, rev, fox, Arctic fox. You have two images on your screen. On the left image is that is Dad of Den R5 at the feeding station, and on the right is one of the cubs, a young male, if I remember correctly, from a different den up in the mountains. So I'm not going to lie, they're my favourite, and I'm talking about this because I've had the pleasure and joy of researching and working in the mountains studying Arctic foxes. So again, this is a den site where we had a camera trap with the permission of the Arctic Fox Project, Stockholm University. Left image, two foxes. On the right is Dad, on the left is Mum. Now they look kind of, Mum looks bigger than Dad in this picture, but I'm fairly certain that's the right way around. The Dad was the white, the Mum was the blue. You can tell he's the white because even in his summer coat he has a white tail. And then on the right picture we have their cubs. And there are 8 cubs in that picture. There were more cubs than that in that den, but you could never get all of them in one shot. And again, you see the colour difference in the cubs. Some blue, some white. Foxes have 2 colours. They are either genetically blue or genetically white. And the white ones turn pure white in the winter and have this kind of mottled whitish brown coat in the summer. And the blues are blue. But adults and cubs, so we have some size information on your screen. It is not a big animal. The female weighing up to almost 3 kilograms and the male 3.5. The cubs are pretty tiny, 57 grams. It's very small. And again, they're born altricial. So the breeding is in April and May, and they are then born 52 days later. So they're born sort of, no, that doesn't sound right. They're born in the early spring. The foxes are born in the early spring, and what they do, they find dens. So you see this structure, it looks kind of like a raised hill. It's exactly what it is. It is a south-facing raised hill, normally on an escarpment on the mountain. South-facing, so it thaws faster. Raised, so it thaws faster. On an escarpment, so it's easy to dig into. And these dens are used by foxes year in, year out. Sometimes different families, sometimes same families. And there are more dens than fox families up there. But we know where they are, which leads to a question. Danny, I'm going to get you to put the poll up now, ready for the next question. Referring to Arctic fox cubs, how many and what they are. But whilst this is happening, I am going to play you this little video, so do enjoy. This is some footage I gathered from the mountains. It's 1 minute long, and it just gives you a chance to hopefully see and start answering the poll when it comes up. Here we have the cubs of that den running around quite happily, on the den, on the hill, playing with each other, biting and jumping and playing. Looking for something, digging and sniffing around for anything they can. And here, might be difficult to see, right at the top of your screen is Mum, the white, exiting stage left. I'm also going to point out, if you look at the timestamp in the bottom right corner, this is 2:30 in the morning. And my camera's not in night mode. This is a camera trap in normal mode. It's the land of the midnight sun. So the video should be ending shortly. Has everyone seen the poll? Is the poll up? Okay. The poll is up. So the question is, how many Arctic fox cubs is the maximum that could be born in one litter? So one female drops a maximum of how many cubs? Got some guesses coming in. Is it right? I can only see 2 bars, Danny.
Yeah, we're resizing.
It's fine. So I talked about where they lived. Ah, that's better. I can see 3 bars now. There we go. Um, good, 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 good. So I talked about them living on these hills in the mountains, Fjell, the mountain, Fjellrev, the mountain fox. The mountain is a beautiful but quite a very difficult place to live. Just whilst the camera's on me, I'm just going to quickly stand up and grab this. Again, I apologise for the morbidity, but the Arctic fox pelt, which was gifted to me, well, I was borrowed by Stockholm University. It's a very, this is a winter coat. You can see a really big, thick, fluffy tail. And it's really long, fluffy fur. Okay. The Arctic fox can survive and shoulder temperatures of minus 70 degrees Celsius just with this coat alone. That's the sort of area that they live in. And it does get that cold in the mountains. In the winter, it can get bitterly cold with wind chill and everything. And in the summer, that's why they shed to the 2 different coats. They have one of these coats for the winter, and they have a thinner, lighter coat for the summer when it's really hot. So when I was up in the mountains, we were dealing with 25 Celsius heat with 3 foot of snow, almost a meter of snow on the ground where we're walking. Quite complicated. Is that the time of the poll now, Danny? Poll is done. Okay, so we have a majority answer for 16 cubs. We have slightly more. So basically, first place 16, second place 8, third place 25. How many answers is it? I can't see the numbers here, Danny.
So we got for 8 cubs, 3 votes, 16 cubs, 5 votes, 25 cubs, 2 votes.
Well done to those 2 people who voted 25. The indeed answer is 25 cubs in 1 litter maximum. Now, I'm not saying this is in Sweden, because Arctic foxes live anywhere in the circumpolar area, so Canada, Alaska, Greenland, kind of Russia. And those numbers actually come from Canada. In Sweden, the average highest number of cubs, if that makes sense, is 12. So 25 is the scientifically recorded maximum number of cubs in a litter. Quite insane. But I was talking about the Fjällen, about the mountain, and a beautiful area, but quite difficult to live. So 4 pictures are coming up now, hopefully, of which I took when I was up there, because I spent 13 weeks in the mountains. There we go. And it starts on the far right. Get myself the right way around on the mirror. On the far, right. Snow everywhere. And that was 2019. I took that picture. And the picture next to it were 2019. And the other 2, the 2 on the left, were 2020. But even in 2020, I'm stomping through a meter of snow in 25-degree heat. It is complicated up there, and the mosquitoes will eat you alive. So the foxes make do. The foxes live in a really harsh environment and have lots of babies. 25 babies is a lot of babies. 12 in Sweden. But what do they eat? Prey food. So I apologize for showing you something as cute as a hamster, because it does look like a hamster. That rodent which you have in front of you is the Norwegian lemming. The same lemming that the BBC threw off of cliffs to say that they were jumping. That is the primary prey source of everything up on the mountain. Of the Arctic fox, the red fox, the ravens, the skuas, everything eats that. And the lemming lives in a cyclic pattern. It has a 4 to 5 year cycle, which basically means it's low. It has a peak year when there are lemmings everywhere. And that's when lemmings do crazy things like swim across great lakes and maybe fall off a couple cliffs. But then it comes back down again. So they have climb years, peak years, decline years, low years. It basically goes back up like this. So that is the way the life works up on the mountain, because everybody is relying on this rodent. My research was actually looking at a secondary prey item of the Arctic fox, the eggs. So the eggs you can see up there are actually Japanese quail. That's part of my experiment. which I will talk about after the next slide. But eggs and birds, we were assessing to see if they were a secondary prey source or a significant aspect of the diet in Arctic foxes, for Arctic foxes, over a 5-year period. Which you'll have to wait until I publish the results to find out. No, they're not. The wader birds are not a significant part of the diet, be it eggs or birds itself. So, you got unpublished data first. But there is a lot of research about Arctic foxes, and the reason I'm talking about it is to talk about the research. So Stockholm University runs the Arctic Fox Research Project. It's been running for some 40, 50 years now. It's a very long-term project. So, background story. In the 1800s, the Arctic fox was hunted to near extinction for its fur, because it was cute and fluffy and really warm. And then it started to come back, and they were easy to hunt. It's the same methods we use when we're doing the research. They use the same den sites year in, year out. So they're really easy species to find. The red fox is there for a reason, because that is a new problem which is causing a population, which is having an effect on limiting the population growth. Also food. So what do? The population has struggled and there's not really enough food on the mountain. So we have put in, or I say we, the Arctic Fox Project some number of years ago has put in these feeder stations. That side. The box on the floor is a tunnel which the fox can walk into. The black tube on the very side is a big plastic tube which we fill with dog food. And we are doing supplementary feeding. This supplementary feeding is basically essential to their survival in the lemming crash years. Now, we've seen a difference in how many females breed in a lemming spike year and a lemming bottom year. And that doesn't change when we start implementing these feeders. I got to remember it's that side. The feeders don't affect the breeding capacity, they just affect adult survival, is what we're starting to see. But due to the massive decline they suffered in the 1800s, we're at a very difficult point genetically for the Arctic fox. They're in a bottleneck, i.e. they were reduced to such a small number that the number left when they bred together, it wasn't a very genetically diverse group. So there's a lot of research now being done about the genetics and trying to recover them. So there's a breeding project in Norway. There's breeding project in Norway. There's research looking at the effects of human involvement and human tourism in the mountains on their survival, looking at the behavior of the cubs, whether they are aggressive or calm, and if that benefits their survival or allows them to travel more. And my research in this case, whether birds are a good secondary prey source to help the foxes survive and breed. So that was a slightly shorter section, and I do need a drink of water, so I will ask Danny to ask me some questions if he has any.
Yes, we have a question actually came just after the last section.
I'll still take it.
Yeah. Let's see here. It's from Pranav Garud.
Oh, yes.
Good
day, my friend. How you doing?
Might be difficult to answer. I would find it difficult to answer anyway. But how
dear.
far away should you camp to spot a photograph a bear or wolf?
Okay. Right, getting into human interactions with predators. I like it. Okay. For the Arctic fox, and I'm going to start there because it's the one I have the experience of, we would camp anywhere from 1 kilometer, maybe as close as 500 meters away from a den for our scientific research. And we'd be there for a very short number of days to do a very specific piece of work. If I wasn't doing scientific research, I wouldn't be closer than 1 kilometer to an Arctic fox den. And very specifically, the reason I say that, the Arctic foxes has a set den site. It has one location it is at. That is where the cubs are, and that is where the adults bring food back to. For wolves and bears, at any time of year, like when the bear's hibernating, you don't go near it, and you wouldn't want to. It's in a hole underground, you can't see it. Any other time of year, both predators are very active. So it's not really a case of how far away are you from them, because if they don't like where you are, they'll move. So it's a very difficult question to answer. Like, I think what you're trying to get to is how do I best have a chance at seeing them? There are companies who do guided tours where you have a good chance of, you have some chance of seeing some of these species. And what normally you do, you go into like a wooden cabin, a hide, and you can hide in the cabin, in a wooden house, and you can see things from there. Because the wooden house has been there for a long time, so that's just a feature of the environment for the predators. You being inside, as long as you're quiet and you don't make too much smell or noise, is going to be your best chance of finding things. So your best bet is to talk to people who know the area. We will be going through, as I say, at the very end. The last couple slides are about groups in the area who do tracking at events like this, so you can have a chance. My advice, if you know you're in a wolf territory, or you know you're near a bear highway or area bear uses, don't camp there. Like, they're of no risk to humans unto themselves. If you go into a wolf area, they will run away. But you don't want to disturb them. You don't want to upset the animals. You don't want to change their patterns or disrupt their territories, because if you disrupt a wolf territory, it might encroach on another wolf territory and cause a fight. So your best bet is, unless you're going for a specific reason, keep your time as short as you can and don't interact with predators too closely. Sorry for the long-winded answer. That's more of a 3 cents than a 2 cents answer.
Complicated questions, right?
Oh, excuse me.
Good questions, though.
Yes.
Who doesn't want to photograph a predator? I do. And we have a question from Karin again.
Yes.
So about the Arctic fox feeding.
Yes.
And did other animals eat the food at the feeder stations?
Short answer, no. So, good question. Do other animals use the feeding stations? Short answer, no. They are designed in a very specific way. The entrance to the hole is limiting on what can get in there. So the Arctic fox can get in fine enough. The adults is a bit of a squeeze. The cubs, no problem. The red fox is too big. The wolverine is too big. But that being said, there has been more than one case of a young wolverine getting into these tubes, eating too much, getting fat, and not being able to get out, and then being found perfectly alive and healthy and very angry inside a feeder box. So the theory is the design should stop anything else. We have had birds, skewers, and ravens getting into them, but they normally wait outside the feeding station for anything that the cubs drop on the way through. So, not really. They are Arctic fox specific, except for the young wolverines, which makes for an interesting day.
Actually, a very funny story, I must say. We have another question from Sophie Bygden.
Mm-hmm. Hello, Sophie.
I've heard and experienced that cubs of red foxes are curious and not really afraid of humans. Is it the same with cubs of Arctic foxes?
Well, yes, it is. In the short answer, they are curious, they are interested. So within the first slide I showed, there was a young cub on the den watching me. I was approaching the den to do a den check as part of the protocol. And absolutely, this thing just stood there and watched me. And I got closer and, I'm like, shoo, away. And he's like, no, I watch. And so, yes, they're absolutely curious. Same as red foxes. It's something about them learning. So again, as I said, the bear learns everything just by watching and observing. Foxes do as well. Canids do as well. They have to develop and learn these skills. So they are learning and observing what you do and what you are. Absolutely.
I actually have a question myself.
Yes.
So it's pretty sensitive. It's a precarious situation to be dependent on one single species for prey, the lemmings. Have there been any do you know of any cases of Arctic foxes having a different source of food, like a different strategy?
Hmm. Absolutely, good question. So, other prey species. So, when I talk about the Arctic foxes and the lemmings, that is very much Sweden, Scandinavia specific. And I should point out we share a population of Arctic foxes with Norway and Sweden because there's no hard borders for wildlife. And we have just over 300 individuals in that population. When I say the lemmings, there are other small rodents as well, but they're not in great numbers. So the lemming is primary. Outside of Scandinavia and sort of more the Finnish population and going around to Canada, there have been foxes who have developed a taste for goose eggs. And they would go up onto cliffs and they would steal the eggs of geese, which caused a bit of a problem at the time because the geese itself was protected and the fox was protected. So at which point, which one do you control to protect the other? So yeah, absolutely. So they do develop different traits. Like we've seen wolves in America fishing. You got the wolves who live on the bays and the coasts and they fish or eat shellfish. So things do adapt, but for the Arctic fox specifically, it's goose eggs.
All right. We have more questions here.
Yay.
Elin Lönnberg.
Yes.
How much of a disturbance are hikers for the Arctic foxes?
Good question. So some research done by a friend of mine at Stockholm University looked exactly at this sort of effects on their behavior at different distances to the den. If you're just walking past them and you're not paying any attention, you're not looking in their direction, the parents will watch you. The cubs will probably hide, but they'll be out again in 2-3 minutes afterwards. But the closer you get, the parents start becoming vocal and barking and making noises, and the cubs hide, and it takes longer and longer for them to come out of the den. And that's the measure we used for disturbance, was how close am I when they disappear, and when I leave, how long does it take for them to come back out? So hikers are not a massive issue. Also, Arctic fox dens tend to be in the not so accessible areas of the mountains. You don't tend to find them like right next to a hiking trail. A few exceptions, but they're not generally too close. So hikers are not a massive risk.
Okay, and now a question from Connor Droney. How do lynx live? Is it in a den? Do they live in a den?
Sure. So lynx, the den is kind of primitive when I say den compared to that of the wolf or the wolverine or the Arctic fox. It's very, very primitive. They basically just find a tree that's fallen over and they've got like a nice natural cavern. I think cavern's probably a better word. An area where it's less wet than everywhere else. So they don't construct dens, they don't dig dens, they just find natural tree root or rock structures which they can get underneath. So you do have to be a little bit aware when you're looking underneath rocks, because underneath rocks is a good place for anything to live. Everything from snakes up to lynx. Excuse me. So how do they live? Yeah, that's it. And when they're sleeping during the day, and they'll find a thick bush or something to get underneath. They'll just get somewhere where they can't be seen. They just don't want to be seen. The pelt is thick enough that they don't get cold. It's the one up at the end over there. Let me just spin this round. So this is a lynx again in summer. Very soft, super soft. And I don't know how much of it I can show you because it's just very short tail, little black bob. This one's quite thin. It's the summer. It's the kind of nice reddish, starting to turn a bit grey on the sides. But they don't get cold and they just want somewhere where they can't be seen. Good.
Okay, I think we're done with the questions from this section.
Wonderful.